Hey everyone, I've been hoping to get my hands on an Ecoflow Delta ever since I reviewed their River Pro earlier this year. It quickly became my top choice for a mid-size power station. And Christmas came early this year when Ecoflow offered to send me their Delta Max. It was at the top of my wish list, and they also sent along a 400 watt folding solar panel as a very bulky stocking stuffer. Now, before we dive in, I want to let you know that Ecoflow has a pretty incredible holiday sale going on right now. You can save up to $1,100 on an Ecoflow Max package, so please check out the link in the description for more details. Ecoflow is my favorite power station manufacturer right now because of their attention to design, excellent smartphone app, amazing fast charging, very powerful inverters, and just overall fit and finish. So is this the best large but portable power station you can buy today? How does it stack up to other competitors like from Bluetti and Goal Zero? So stay tuned, we're going to cover all that and much, much more. The Delta Max is Ecoflow's second largest unit in its lineup, just below the Delta Pro. The Max comes in two different flavors. There's a 1600 watt hour and a larger 2000 watt hour, which is the unit I'll be reviewing in this video. The front of the Max has a super clean design with just the display and USB ports, which I really like. Around the side, there are two expansion ports. These are used to add the two additional 2 kilowatt batteries. And at the top of the unit, there are a pair of fans on both sides to keep the electronics cool. In my tests, I found that it would be completely silent if you were charging or discharging at 200 watts or less, and above that it would turn on, but they really weren't very loud. Around back, there is the DC and AC outputs, as well as the input section to charge it. And I really like this because it keeps the clutter of wires out of the way for a much cleaner look. The power inputs are hidden behind a door, just like with the River Pro. There's an XT60 input for car and solar charging, and for wall charging, well, that's really Ecoflow's ace. They have a really great charging system where you just plug a cord in. No loud, ugly power bricks. Around the other side, you can see the fans, and that's pretty much how the unit looks. Really like how simple it is. The bottom has a pair of large rubber feet that keep the unit stable, and best of all, it doesn't mar surfaces when you slide it around. In the middle, there is a large sticker with all the key stats that you need to know about the unit, including its 2016 watt-hour capacity and a bunch of features for safety. So it has high and low temperature cutoff, as well as all the standard international safety certifications, which is really important. The top is actually very simple. You might think that there's wireless charging up there like the Bluetti, but there's not. There's beefy integrated handles on both sides that give you lots of grip and balance the weight really nicely. For a 2 kilowatt pack, it's surprisingly portable at only 48 pounds. I think Ecoflow really nailed the form factor on the Max. It strikes the perfect balance of capacity and weight, and is pretty much the maximum size that you can comfortably carry around. Ecoflow has my favorite display design on the market. It's bright, crisp, and super easy to read, whether it's in full sunlight or at night. The screen shows the battery level percentage and a ring gauge, input and output power in watts, time to full or empty, and small indicator icons for the status of various outputs. Below the display, there's a small button that's used to pair the Max to your Wi-Fi network. Once paired, you can use their really slick mobile app that works on iOS and Android. Within the app, you can monitor the battery level, input and output wattage, and even turn the AC, DC, and USB outputs on or off. I really like the ability to check the battery status from anywhere in my house, and I think it's particularly useful if you have this installed somewhere like in a van. Preferences allow you to configure pretty much everything about the Max. One of the settings I really liked was the ability to adjust the minimum and maximum discharge and charge levels. And so by setting it to either 10 to 90% or 20 to 80%, that will dramatically prolong the lifespan of the battery. There's also settings for the input maximum for the car charger. Normally it goes at 8 amps, which I think is a safe amount for the most part, but if your car struggles with that, you can turn that down. There's also settings to adjust how much maximum power you can pull from the wall charger. And you can also set timeouts for the unit, the screen, and the AC power to prevent it from draining unnecessarily. Within the app, you can also update the firmware, and there's a really great help center, as well as the ability to communicate directly with tech support and file tickets. There's also a complete set of specifications, so you have all the information that you need at your fingertips without having to consult the manual. So overall, I think the app is a huge differentiator for all the Ecoflow products, and I am very impressed with the quality of it. Below the display are the USB outputs. A physical button turns all the ports on or off, or it can be turned on and off through the app. Now, I was really impressed that they included 2 100-watt USB-C ports, but I was curious whether that was going to be split between the 2 ports, or whether each USB-C had 100 watts of output. So I figured the best way to test that would be to plug in a pair of MacBook Pros. Those are very power-hungry laptops. I fired up a bunch of YouTube videos on each one of them, and I was able to get close to 200 watts of output. So that does prove that each of the USB-Cs will give you 100 watts of output, which is super impressive. There's also 4 USB-A ports. 2 of them are standard USB ports, and 2 are the quick charge variety. Not sure why they're not all that. And I was able to plug in a number of different USB things, from an iPad Pro, iPad Mini, a USB power bank, and a speaker. And I was able to charge everything flawlessly in addition to the 2 MacBook Pros. So this thing is a USB beast. Now you can see I'm getting 12 watts on one of the standard USBs, 13 watts on one of the fast chargers. I didn't see any really big fast numbers for the fast charger, but that may have been the devices that I was testing. So with everything plugged in, I was getting well above 200 watts from the USB side of things, which I think is the highest I've ever measured on a device. AC wall charging is done through a standard plug at rates up to 1,800 watts. And the best part, it doesn't use any loud charging bricks like Goal Zero and Bluetti. Now, wall charging is one of the key differentiators of Ecoflow. Nobody can touch their charging speeds. I typically saw charging rates well over 1,600 watts, which meant it could be charged from 0 to 73% in 1 hour and be fully charged in about 90 minutes, so it works exactly as advertised. Faster, however, is not always better for the battery health. So keep in mind that charging or discharging any battery at high rates like this will shorten its life. So it's really great to have the option to charge it slower if you're not in a hurry. Luckily, there's a handy switch to choose between charging at max speed or at a lower rate that's configurable in the app. I typically leave this on the slowest charging speed of 200 watts to be as gentle as possible on the battery, and it also has the benefit of being completely silent. And this extreme technology is actually legitimately super cool. And apparently the way it works is it uses the same circuitry as the inverter and essentially runs it in reverse. And I don't know how it can manage to both use the inverter and charge at the same time, but let's just call it magic. And apparently you can combine the wall charger with solar or the companion smart generator and charge up to 3,400 watts. So this thing would fill in well less than an hour, which is just mind-blowing. The Delta Max has DC outputs around the back. They're controlled with a single button, and there are 2 barrel connectors for connecting things like laptops, as well as a standard cigarette lighter style accessory port. This is fully regulated at about 12.9 volts, which is good. And it's rated to put out 8 amps at 12 volts, so that would be about 100 watts. And I figured the best way to test this would be to plug in the car adapter for my River Pro and plug that into the Delta Max and let the Max charge the River Pro. And once I got everything hooked up, it worked as advertised. So the River Pro was reporting it was getting almost 100 watts, about 95 watts. And according to the Delta Max, it was putting out about 114 watts. So the DC output is super solid on this. What about the DC input? So I had a big leaf blowing day and I was far from home. And so I threw the Delta Max in my car and I brought along the car charging cable. So on the way to and from, I could charge it at about 85 to 100 watts. And I brought a supercharger for my Ego batteries and I plugged that in and that drew almost 500 watts. And I was able to charge 4 batteries during the day. So the car charger worked great and it's a really great mobile power station. All right, it's time to really test this battery. So the Delta Max has a 2016 watt-hour lithium-ion NCM chemistry battery rated at 800 cycles to 80% capacity. Now, interestingly, the slightly smaller Delta Max 1600 is only rated at 500 cycles, so keep that in mind. Ecoflow uses premium 18650 cells in a 14S 16P configuration, which makes the unit super compact and lightweight. So how much power can you actually pull from this pack? To test the overall usable battery capacity, I first charged the battery to 100% and applied a steady AC load of 460 watts to measure the total power I could pull from the battery before it hit 0%. And when I ran this test, I actually did it a little too aggressively. Normally this should be a 5-hour test, and instead I discharged it in 4 hours, and I was still able to get 1,870 watt hours, which translates to a 93% efficiency. That's super impressive. For reference, all the other generators I've tested usually give me in the low 80%. I tested the max continuous power rating of the inverter, and I was able to run it for a full 10 minutes at its maximum rated output of 2400 watts, and it performed flawlessly. To push it further, I was able to run this for almost 2 full minutes at almost 3000 watts, which performed well beyond its rating. The inverter on this thing is a beast. To do these tests, I had to actually use 2 space heaters and a heat gun to hit the maximums. So speaking of max power, how much can this handle for peaks? Well, I had all those plugged in, I was cranking up the heat gun, and I was able to get this thing up to 3,900 watts before the inverter finally kicked in its safety. And so overall, I really think this thing has very good headroom. I feel like the Bluetti inverters tend to only exactly do what they're rated at. These have a lot more headroom and can handle the spikes that certain appliances might need. The other thing I really like is that it's really easy to reset it. You just tap the AC button, things turn back on, there's no drama. It's real easy. And as one final torture test, I wanted to run both AC and DC at the same time, maxed out. So I plugged the DC output from the Delta into my River Pro to charge it at about 100 watts. And then I plugged in a number of space heaters and I wanted to see how much AC power I could pull at the same time. And I was able to pull over 3000 watts on AC while outputting 100 watts DC. So this thing really did a great job on this torture test. There is also the X-Boost feature in this unit, and this is Ecoflow's special technology that allows you to, in theory, run larger appliances than the inverter is rated for, and it does that by essentially lowering the voltage to stay within the same wattage. And in my testing, it really didn't make much of a difference because the inverter was so large on this unit already. It might be more helpful on a small unit like the River Pro, but in my case, I tend to leave this off, so I'm ensuring super clean power to all my appliances. I'm primarily going to use this to power my home in cases when the grid goes down. And the Max is perfect for this because it has a large capacity battery, and the inverter can power pretty much any appliance that plugs into a standard 15 to 20 amp circuit. To test how well this would work in a grid down scenario, I plugged the Max into my 2 transfer panels and it was able to fully power 8 15 amp circuits at the same time. This included my full-size fridge, microwave, water heater, garage door opener, sump pump, and all the lighting on 2 entire floors of my house. I never had a fault, even when running the microwave and other appliances at the same time. This thing is a beast. Just using the battery without any solar, I was able to get 8 to 12 hours of runtime, depending on exactly what appliances we happen to be using at the time. For longer power outages, the Max can be expanded with up to 2 expansion batteries, each 2 kilowatt hours apiece, for a total of 6,048 watt hours. Now these use the same internal battery and generally the same case, and cost about $1,600 each. So beyond batteries, you can further expand this with the Ecoflow Smart Generator. And I wish I had one of these to test because it's a super interesting product. So the general idea is it's a standard inverter style generator, but it has electronics in it to communicate to the Delta Max. And so the Delta Max can tell it when it reaches a certain threshold and it needs to be charged. This thing will automatically kick on and it will power the Delta with up to 1800 watts, which is just like plugging it into the wall. And once it's fully charged, it will automatically shut the generator back down again. So all you need to do is make sure the generator has gas, and this takes care of the rest. As much as I like solar, it's really good to have a generator. It will always be able to generate electricity when the weather is not good and when it's nighttime. So I have this relatively inexpensive Ryobi 700 watt generator, and that is great because it's basically the same size as the Delta Max, and it runs on propane. So propane as a fuel never goes bad, which means I can keep quite a few of the cans around and not worry about rotating through fuel like I would with gas. Now this is a small generator, so it's only rated at 700 watts. So what I do is turn it down in the app to a 600 watt charging speed, which means this will fully charge up the Delta Max in about 4 hours. The Delta Max can be used as an emergency power supply, which means you can plug in critical appliances to the Delta and then plug the Delta into the wall. And while the grid is up, the power will flow directly from the wall to the appliances. But as soon as the grid goes down, it will automatically switch over to using the battery. That takes about 30 milliseconds, so it's fine for things like fridges, but not so good for electronics like a computer. Solar charging is done via the included MC4 to XT60 cable. The Delta Max has a high-efficiency MPPT solar charge controller that can handle up to 800 watts of power with a voltage range of 11 to 100 volts at 10 amps. So it should be compatible with a really wide range of panels, and I'm really surprised at how low a voltage this thing would work at. Ecoflow also sent me their brand new 400 watt folding solar panel. This thing's rated at 48 volts at 11 amps, and it's made from super high quality monocrystalline panels that are rated at 22.4% efficiency. The panels are using really top of the line materials. They are made from EVA and fiberglass with a really ruggedized ETFE film for protection. And these are really the only kind of portable panels that I'd recommend getting. These are similar to the TP Solar that I reviewed earlier. And although this is pretty manageable to carry, it weighs 27.6 pounds and you can carry it one-handed. Once it is unfolded, this thing is a beast. It's 42 by 93 inches, so it's basically a sheet of plywood, but it's a lot floppier because it's in 4 different sections. Now, the case has a rigid back, and you use these 2 carabiners to hook into the eyelets on the panel, and that gives it some structure in the middle. The sides of the panel are kind of just propped up on the ground, and it takes a little bit of finessing to get it to be fairly flat. I would say this thing never gets 100% flat, but it's pretty good as far as catching the sun, and it's fully adjustable in terms of the angle. Most portable panels cannot be left out in the rain or snow at all because they're made of fabric and they're not watertight. But this has an impressive IP67 waterproof rating, which means it can be submerged for 30 minutes in a meter of water. So this thing can really be left out in foul weather, so you don't have to run out if it's going to be a rainstorm. So rain's not quite as much of a problem, but wind, well, that can happen. So I would say if you're setting this up on a deck, you might want to lean it against a wall rather than using the stand on a windy day. But overall, I really like the construction of this. The junction box where it connects to the panel is super strong, and that's usually a weak spot on a flexible panel. I really liked the overall quality of this. It feels super beefy. And even with a really cloudy day, I was getting 250 watts out of it, which I know is nothing to write home about. But once the clouds cleared a little bit, I was getting 360 watts, which is pretty darn impressive considering it was a very hazy day and it was December. So my overall impressions on the 400 watt panel are that it's really well made. It seems to be very efficient, especially in adverse conditions. It's relatively lightweight considering that you're getting 400 watts from this unit. I would say it's best for people like myself who want to deploy these every once in a while when you lose power at home. But I think if you were doing a van life thing and you wanted to deploy these daily, honestly, I think they just take up too much space and they're probably a little difficult to work with day to day. If you're watching this video, you're probably trying to decide between the Delta Max and the Bluetti AC200MAX. So they both have the same retail price of $2,100. They are both 2 kilowatt power stations that can be expanded with extra batteries. They have similar solar, car charging, and DC outputs. They all have smartphone apps and a 2-year warranty. So what's the difference? Well, first of all, the Bluetti has a pretty terrible wall charger. It's large, it's loud, and it only delivers 500 watts of power, while the Ecoflow can charge up to 1800 watts with no power brick at all. It also has a touchscreen that, although cool, is really hard to read outside. It's also the only way to turn on the AC and DC outputs, and I prefer the physical buttons on the Delta Max. One new thing I've been paying close attention to is standby power use. That is, how much power does the battery lose when it's just sitting there? It's an important metric that I don't see people talking about. My Goal Zero Yeti 1000 had practically no standby power loss, at less than probably 1% a week. It's so efficient, in fact, that it doesn't even have a power button. However, when I recently tested the Bluetti AC200P, I found it lost nearly 1% an hour, even if the AC, DC, and USB ports were completely off. With the ports on, it could be almost double that. So if you don't power it off, it will be dead in a few days, even if you never plug anything in. That's bad. Now, fortunately, when I tested the Delta Max, I found it would only lose about 1% per day, with all the ports off, but the screen on. Even when I turned all the ports on, AC, DC, USB, it would only lose about 3/4 of a watt per hour. So Ecoflow seems to have a much more efficient electronics. Now, the Bluetti does have a few advantages over the Max. First off, there's a pair of 15-watt wireless chargers on top, which is cool, but not something I use too much because it's just sitting in the basement. The solar input can accept up to 900 watts and, even better, 145 volts, so you have more flexibility with how you wire your solar panels. The Bluetti can be expanded with 2 3 kilowatt batteries for a total of 8 versus 6 on the Max. But Bluetti's big feature is it has the newer lithium iron phosphate or LFP battery that is safer and rated at 3,500 cycles versus 800 for Delta's NMC battery. That means the total cost of ownership is 4 times lower on the Bluetti, so you need to factor that in to your purchase decision. LFP batteries are a bit larger and heavier because of the lower energy density compared to NMC. However, the Bluetti is much bulkier than it should be. It's 24% larger by volume and 30% heavier at 62 pounds. Now, I figured out there's an older version of the Max called the AC200 that used an NCM battery, so I can calculate the weight difference of the battery chemistries. When I dug up the specs, it's still 57 pounds, so something about the Bluetti design makes it more than 10 pounds heavier than the Ecoflow, the same capacity and the same battery chemistry. It also means that the Delta Max would only be about 5 pounds heavier if they switched to LFP. Not too bad. The Bluetti is also much more of a chore to carry around. You really feel those extra 14.3 pounds, and the taller enclosure means that you need to lift it higher up than the Delta. Coupled with the extra weight, this is not something that you want to lug around on a daily basis. The Delta Max, however, felt much easier to carry by comparison. The Yeti 1500 has comparable specs, but with 500 watt-hours less capacity, proprietary cables, and an embarrassingly slow 120 watt wall charger for roughly the same cost. It's just not a good value. And if you want a 600 watt wall charger, well, that's going to set you back another $200. Yikes. What about Jackery? Well, they just seem very mediocre to me, even if they're solid. I'll pass. All right, so let's wrap this up. I see Ecoflow like the Apple of power stations, where everything is streamlined, beautiful, lightweight, and efficient. There's a coherence to their design language and product line that I really appreciate. It's just rock solid. Bluetti is a bit like Samsung. Lots of innovative features at competitive prices, but the design isn't nearly as polished because sometimes they try to do too much, too fast, and ship things that aren't quite baked. And I guess that makes Goal Zero the BlackBerry of the bunch. They used to be the leader, but have been slow to adapt, and now have fallen really far behind. Let's hope that changes in the future. I'm rooting for you guys. So is the Ecoflow Delta the best portable 2 kilowatt power station right now? Heck yeah, it is. The ability to power 15 devices at once makes this the perfect all-in-one camper van or overlanding electrical system. And it's perfect for home backup for grid down scenarios. It just really packs a huge punch in a small package. I'm going to replace the Yeti 1000 in my minivan build with the Delta Max next summer because it's way more capable. I do hope Ecoflow switches to the LFP batteries in 2022, or at least offer the option for folks like me who value the safety and longevity in exchange for a few pounds. That's pretty much my only criticism, which, as you know, is pretty rare for my reviews. But I really think Ecoflow knocked this one out of the park. Remember, if you'd like to pick up a Delta Max or really any Ecoflow product, now is a great time to do so with our holiday sale. You can save up to $1,100, so check out the link in the description. Note that I do get a small commission, and that helps me keep the channel going, and I do appreciate the support. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Please be sure to give this a thumbs up and subscribe if you liked it, and have yourself a very happy holiday. Till next time.